So welcome everybody, my name is Ron Northcutt, and this is a crash course in progressive decoupling, which is funny because in one of the first slides I'm going to tell you, don't call it that, but we'll get there. I'm a principal solutions architect with Acquia. I lead our demo team. So on the demo team we build out there's a distribution called Demo Framework. We just did a session about it, that we build to power all the demos when we go show people what Drupal is when they don't know what Drupal is. There is a lot of progressive decoupling we've got in there. I personally have been a huge fan of this concept for many years and been a proponent for a long time, and you can ask pretty much anybody at Acquia and they'll tell you, yes, this is one of those things that, number one, Ron won't shut up about, and number two, if you get a drink or two in him and you ask a question, then you're just done for the night. So, fair warning to all of you. This is something I do like to talk about. So one thing that we're going to do here is this is a crash course, so it's going to actually cover a whole lot of stuff at a reasonably high level, but we're going to dig deep in a few key areas. And so hopefully you come away with a pretty good understanding of how this can work and how you can talk about it with other people. So this is me. I've been using Drupal since about 4.7. Did some freelance developments. Worked as an actual developer for another company. Came over to Acquia about 5.5 years ago, as a solutions architect. That's a sales engineer. It's just a really fancy title. It sounds cool, but pretty much it just means a problem solver. So we come in, people have problems, and we tell them how we think that they should solve those problems, and guess what? Most of the time it's Drupal. That's going to be a core piece of it. And now I lead the demo team, as I mentioned. You can find me at RL Northcutt, pretty much all places. Drupal, LinkedIn, Twitter. rlnorthcutt@gmail is my personal email. So if you have questions, want to reach out, or want to complain, that's fine too. Just let me know. So here's what we're going to talk about. One is kind of high-level progressive decoupling. I'm assuming everybody here knows what that means, but we're going to pretend like we don't, because somebody else listening later may not. The three modes of using Drupal. What does that mean? We're going to talk about component-based architectures today, and this isn't about Drupal specifically. It's about, typically you see this a lot in JavaScript frameworks, for example. So we're going to talk about that, how that ties in, and then we're going to use all of those pieces to go through kind of like an example of what a large organization that has some specific problems that we're trying to solve, and how we can solve those problems using Drupal and using progressive decoupling, which again, I'm going to suggest you don't use that word, but that's okay. And then we're going to talk also about when to use these tools or not. Very, very important as you sit down and you're talking to folks. So progressive decoupling. As far as I know, the first time anybody talked about this phrase, progressive decoupling, it was Dries, and it was about 2015. And he was talking about how, because decoupled applications were starting to pick up a lot of steam, and he was suggesting that instead of looking at decoupling the entire application, how about you just decouple little bits of it? And really, really genius, honestly. And I don't think people, even in the community, have traditionally fully appreciated how smart that is and the advantages. More people in the last few years especially have really been starting to jump on the bandwagon. I think there was like another session or something about PDB, progressively decoupled blocks, here, which is lovely. I've been talking about this in that module in particular because it's such a great one to use for a number of years, and it's been a bit disheartening to feel like I was alone with this really amazing thing, and now other people are getting it, which is lovely. Although to be fair, the concept behind this isn't really that new. We've been doing that basically with Ajax for years and years and years and years, in Drupal even. But of course, working with Ajax and trying to do things is usually a huge pain. So we're going to be specifically looking at PDB, which is the Progressively Decoupled Blocks module. I'm actually working with Matt Davis, who's the guy that created it. They created it for weather.com 3-4 years ago, 5 years ago. It might have even been before Dries had this blog post. They created this module. We're actually looking at refactoring it and repackaging it in the component namespace. Because when I talk to people and I say, oh, you should use the PDB module, it's like, well, what is it? Oh, progressively decoupled blocks. And it's just like a blank stare. Versus having a module that's called component. Oh, you want to use a React component in your Drupal site? Great. Go get the component module. Oh, that makes sense. So, very excited. I just got to take over that namespace like this week, so now we're starting. In the case of progressive decoupling, Drupal is still the glass. Drupal is still the presentation layer that's outputting things. The difference is that you have these pieces of the output that are going to be managed on the client side, typically. Technically, you can do it server side or on the edge, but we're not going to talk about that today. And they're basically like little mini applications. And when people start to think of it that way, it helps them to understand how this works, and then they can actually understand why doing this with Drupal is so incredibly powerful. The other thing that's really lovely is that when we start to talk about expanding out and doing other things like, we were talking earlier about personalization. And regardless of what personalization tool you're using, it's actually a lot more difficult to use those tools in a decoupled application than it is to use them with Drupal, for example. So as we're going to see later, it's actually possible to use them side by side, right within inside Drupal, as you normally would, and everybody plays nice, which is good. So don't call it progressive decoupling. Please don't call it that. The only people that are going to understand what you mean are probably going to be Drupal people, and I can guarantee you that a lot of those people aren't really going to understand what you mean, because this is a really weird space. Most people don't know what this means. It doesn't make any sense if you're not in Drupal most of the time. A lot of people aren't even aware of this really as an architectural approach, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. And even when I do have the ability to explain it to someone, they still make it more complicated than it needs to be. And in fact, that's what I think one of the biggest barriers here is, that people think this is so difficult, and it's actually not. The problem is that most people, if you're a developer, you're either a back-end developer, in this case, PHP is your primary language, and you're using Drupal, using Composer, or you're a front-end developer, typically JavaScript, using something like Gulp, using React or Angular, or whatever the flavor of the week is. And there really aren't too many people that fit between those two, that can speak both of those languages well. So for the people who are more back-end developers, and what I might consider a traditional Drupalist, for them the Drupal piece is easy and makes sense, but that React stuff is weird, man. Like, I don't get it. I don't have a frame of reference. It's kind of a black box. So it's complicated because I don't understand it. For people that are more on the front side, the React stuff, or whether you're using Vue.js or Angular or whatever, they get how that works. They can see the code. It's right there in front of them. But this whole Drupal thing is this black box with all kinds of arcane, gross stuff inside. They use PHP. Oh man, they do all this other weird stuff. They have to deal with databases and twig templates, and I don't even want to touch that. It's a nightmare. So the overlap of those two has traditionally been very small, and I think that's one of the big reasons why this hasn't been more widely utilized yet. But also I think that's why it's so important that we do understand it well enough to not overcomplicate it. So the suggestion that I have, and I spent a lot of time working over the late spring with some of the folks in our marketing department, product marketing department, we put together some webinars and things for partners and customers to talk about this. It was a really, really great exercise, because I'm talking to somebody who's not a developer, someone who has some basic technical knowledge. This is a marketing person. So this is not somebody who does things on the command line. This is not somebody who knows React or knows Drupal PHP. They can use Drupal, they can create content, they understand how that works, they understand how these things work at a high level. So in working with this guy, David Aponovich, really, really awesome guy, super smart, we tried a bunch of different things, and what we finally settled on was this idea of hybrid or hybrid decoupling. I like this a lot more because it already tells you basically what we're talking about here. We're talking about a hybrid. We're talking about two different things coming together. And when we put it in the framework of these three modes, which we're going to talk about in a minute, it makes even more sense. So I've had a lot of luck with that, and I would recommend, instead of saying progressive decoupling, especially when you're talking to non-Drupalists or non-technical people, that you talk about it in this way. You can call it whatever you like, just a suggestion. But please don't call it progressive decoupling. Let's educate people on this and get them up to speed. This is an incredibly powerful approach. It solves a ton of problems, some problems that a lot of people don't even realize that they're going to have until it's too late. And it's something that, again, part of my job is to think about how do we sell Drupal in a space where we have all this competition from these major players like Sitecore and Adobe and now Contentful and all of these other players who want to get rid of Drupal and use something else. This is something we can do really, really well, and it provides a ton of value that a lot of these other platforms either can't do or can't do well, or that they just don't know yet. I guarantee you they're going to catch up at some point, but hopefully Drupal will still be ahead because of the way it's designed. And I just thought that was a cool picture, so that's why that's there. Okay, the three modes. So when I sit down and I talk to customers all the time. People from marketing, technical people that know what they're talking about, people that don't. And typically, this is what I see, that most people think it's a one or the other. Either you've got a traditional CMS or you have a decoupled CMS. And you think, great, this is wonderful. And you probably have seen that in the last, the last 3 years or so at Acquia, a lot of messaging and resources have come out about decoupled and why Drupal is so good at being a headless CMS, which is true. The problem is that it's not an either or. And when we talk about it or think about it that way, which most people do, we're missing a huge amount of the value that we can provide. So what we want to do is, when we talk to people, we want to educate them. So the second you hear decoupled, you should ask them, are you talking about fully decoupled, or are you talking about hybrid decoupled? And I can guarantee you, most of the people are not going to know what you're talking about when you say hybrid, which is good, because you want them to ask, and then you can talk to them about how that is. Internally, we call these the robot slides. Very useful. So there is this third mode that we've been calling this hybrid. Now the beautiful thing is it combines the best of both worlds. Because now, not only do I have the ability to control all or most of the display and the experience using Drupal, which it's really good at and is designed for, I also have the ability to take any of that content and use it in a headless way if I want to, side by side. Drupal can power my site, and that same content can be used in a mobile app or in a kiosk, as we're going to see later, or whatever I want. Or I can even use, as you can see there, decoupled components inside the experience layer as provided by Drupal. So I can have right next to a block that is being output with the list of latest articles, I can have a decoupled block which is calling out to some external API to grab information and display it right there, right next to each other. For the end user, they don't know any different. It just looks and works the same. And for the content creator, they don't know any different. It just looks and works the same. From a development standpoint, there's not a huge difference either. Again, it's a really elegant, beautiful solution when it's done properly. So let's talk about each one real quick. Each of these robot slides, pros and cons, is going to be important when you're talking to people about this approach. So the traditional or fully coupled CMS, it's the way CMSs have traditionally been done. Tightly coupled content to the back end. But the good thing is that modern CMSs solve this problem of allowing non-technical or largely non-technical users to be able to create content and now manage experiences, right? Using like Layout Builder, using blocks, media. Now we've really given a lot of power to these content creators and these marketing people to do all these great, wonderful things without having to write code, without having to do deployments, all this other great stuff. Super, super powerful. Now, when we're talking about headless, and we're going to see a slide about this later, now suddenly, it's almost, in a certain way, it's almost like we're going back to where we were before we had a CMS. Because now, someone's created content. Great. They made an article, they filled it out, they went through the editorial workflow, they got it published. It's been published now, it's available through the API, now it's showing up in my decoupled application. Fantastic. Then the content person's looking at it saying, you know what? It would just be so much better if you could move that block from the left side to the right side. And the front-end developer's like, no problem. I can change the template, we can get that done. Let's see, it's going to probably take me, not too long, maybe 30 minutes or an hour to make the change. Then I'll have to put it through the QA process. Then we're going to have to get everything done. Once we're approved and we're good to go, we'll put it on the deployment schedule. Right now we're doing deployments every 2 weeks. So if we're lucky, I'll get it to you in about a month. And so from the content creator standpoint, they're like, what's going on here, man? It's moving a thing from one side to the other. Why does that take so long? Well, it's not the developer's fault. That's just the process. It's just that now we've got a situation here where the developer becomes the bottleneck. There are times when this makes sense. So if you've got, if the developer is actually owning the experience and needs to, and that needs to be tightly controlled, this makes a ton of sense. Depending on what you're trying to accomplish, the experience you're going for, and the types of integrations you're going to do, again, this can completely make sense, as we're going to see some examples. But we just need to keep that in mind. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the trade-offs as we go through. Right now, I guess. Okay. So all of the things that we lose all of the stuff that Drupal does for us out of the box, particularly things that empower the content creator and the site builder. So like menus, clean URLs, not only creating them, but allowing you to manually set them, creating the patterns that it's going to use, using the token system, allowing authors to manage and control meta tags, allowing those meta tags to be driven by defaults and by tokens, but also be manually overridable. Media management is pretty strong. It's getting stronger every day in Drupal. It's something that you're going to lose. The ability to use views, super, super powerful. It makes personalization more difficult, as we talked about. So none of these are deal breakers, right? Like if I'm building a React app and I want to give my content creators the ability to control meta tags or to affect the clean URLs that are going to be showing up, they're going to be displayed in my my web app, I can do those things, but I've got to create them. I've got to take time out of my budget, and I've got to take time out of my roadmap to commit to those, versus Drupal gives it to me for free on day one out of the box. So we want to think about what we're losing when we're doing this, because a lot of times what happens is developers, we all have our favorites, right? We have our favorite languages, our favorite frameworks. We have the tools that we either like or that we're excited about that we want to use in a project. So a lot of times developers aren't always thinking about what's going to happen later. And it's going to create pain. And anytime you create pain in the organization, it's going to come back to you eventually, right? Because the content creators are going to be, banging your door down trying to figure out how they can get that block moved over faster. Now, when we start talking about the hybrid mode, this is where some of those problems actually just go away. So we no longer have to worry about authoring content preview, which is a big one, workflow, media management, site builder stuff. All that stuff we get to still take advantage of, just like in the traditional mode. Only now, we also have the ability to feed that content out via an API if we have decoupled applications that make sense, and we have the ability to take those components and pull them into the site. And in fact, if you set it up right, you can do both at the same time. And that's one of the examples we're going to take a look at. So yes, best of all worlds, hybrid, take care of your content creators. The thing that's nice about this is that if done properly, this allows you to leverage more of your team. From the developer, the back-end developer, the front-end developer, the content creator, the designers, the site builders. When we do our job right and we build the right system, then more of the team is empowered to do what they need to do, and so you've got more cylinders running at the same time. So you move a lot faster. And if you do it right, then you can remove some things from the developer's plate which means that they can refocus on those really cool things or really important things that nobody has time for, like testing, like going in and doing CI/CD, like going in and creating really cool integrations with their back-end systems that everyone's like, it'd be great if we could do this, but we don't have time. If you do this right, you can free up cycles to get more value and to provide that value to your organization. Okay, so let's talk about component-based architecture, and then we're going to see how all of these pieces fit together. You okay, man?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. It's the cold, man. It makes me sleepy.
Not you, it's me.
Okay. Good to know. Good to know. So I stole this from this blog post, this picture. I thought it was pretty good. But the component-based model is an abstraction that allows you to build large-scale applications composed of small, self-contained, and often reusable components. He goes on to say headers, navigation bars, layout, sidebars, blah, blah, blah. Stuff we can do in Drupal. But you get the idea. Those three keys, though, small, self-contained, and reusable. Very, very important. You know, a few years ago, the big thing about Decoupled was SPAs, right? Single-page applications. Everybody's building these single-page applications until those single-page applications get so complicated that it gets really, really painful and difficult to manage. And so what have we done? We've gone from a single-page application to an application composed of components. That's this component-based architecture. Makes a ton of sense. But we kind of flipped it on its side a little bit. So the old model, if you will, is MVC. You've got your model, your view, and your controller layers. And each one of those is a horizontal layer. Separation of concerns. Totally makes sense. It's a great way to go. The problem with this is that it's difficult to reuse code unless you go through some extra hoops to set things up the right way. It's difficult to decouple often. And again, it gets really difficult when you start managing very, very complicated applications. And the types of applications, especially single-page applications that people were creating in like Angular 1 and Angular 2, way, way, way different than the types of applications people are creating today with like React and Vue and the modern versions of Angular. These things are far more advanced, far more complex, a lot cooler, a lot more powerful, but difficult. So what the component model does is instead of going horizontal, you go vertical. So each component has its own data and its own view. It's designed to be reusable. That's the expectation that you have going in. You've got a single or a common, well-defined API for getting data in and out, and it's designed to be decoupled. So a lot of times when you see in these component-based architectures, you've got things like something for state management. Redux in React is a really good example of that. That allows you to have all of these little components, and it doesn't matter how you fit them together, but they're all individual, but they have that state management layer to communicate between each other. That allows you to do really big things. And it allows you to make these really complex applications. Because now, when I've got a single component in a big application, and there's a problem, or there's a feature I need to add, or there's something I need to upgrade, most of the time I can just make the fix to that one thing. And I don't have to worry about how all the other pieces are going to fit together, or if I'm going to change this and it's going to break that. If that happens, well, sometimes it does happen. If it happens a lot, that means that you're not properly using the components, and you need to take a look at that. So, build a lot of different applications, use the same reusable components, easier and faster. That sounds an awful lot like Drupal, right? Like philosophically. Blocks, reusable content, showing the content in different ways, view modes, totally. So what we want to do is we want to take this structure that Drupal provides, which is already modular, right, and often componentized, and mix it together with modern component-based architectures. So let's talk about an example. So let's say that you've got a company that sells stuff, and this company needs to build out a product configurator. So people can go in and they can say, I want this particular type of product, and I want this color, and I want this many of these, and I want that many of those, and it's going to tell you, how much that's going to cost, and exactly which version of whatever it's going to give you. But this company you work for also has, has an online store. They also have physical stores. And so the whole idea behind this push for the product configurator is not only so that you can use it online, but so that you could go into the store to a kiosk and use it there, so you can figure out which version of the Apple laptop you want. Do you want the Pro? Do you want the Air? Which level of features, etc. Right? So how do we do this in a sane way? And how do we do this across all these different applications and try and not have to repeat ourselves? So the solution is a centrally managed library of decoupled components. We have that component library. We can use it to build our JavaScript applications, and we can take those components and we can stick them in Drupal, and they can be the exact same one in 2 different versions. So that when I go and I update this component, everybody that uses it everywhere across my ecosystem gets the update. That's the vision. So let's see how we can get there. So we'll have this kind of sample shared component library in whatever version of repo is your favorite. And we've got a number of different components. We've got the product builder, right, which is that configurator we've talked about. A shopping cart, pretty standard. Product card, a way of looking at product information in a specific way. And you could even get down to the field level. So real-time price of the SKU, real-time availability, do we have this in stock or not, that real-time kind of stuff. And if you break these up in the right way, then you can make use of them in other applications as well. And so the idea is you've got this component library that you build and maintain, and these are the building blocks for your company's applications. And you pull that component library into Drupal, and you can pull it into, in this case, React, but whatever that framework is that you're using over here, and you use the same component in all the places. Everybody with me so far? Yeah, come on, man. There's 3 things on the slide. Of course I'm with you, right? This is simple. This is not that complicated. So if you're using JavaScript, you would use something like npm. You'd use yarn or something else to manage that. So when I go in and I have a team or people who are building and maintaining the component library, and I have another team, it could be the same people, but another team building and maintaining my React app, whenever the component library is updated, just like we do with Composer, we get module updates or whatever, you pull those updates into your app, and then you either use them or they just get updated, and you just make sure things work the way you want. Everything's lovely. No different than the way we do modules. So this is a kind of an example of how that would look. So over on the left-hand side, we've got this fictitious component library, which is a number of folders with all of the files for each component in each one. And you can see here that in my application that is using this component library, which is this Kiosk app, because I'm just going to be running, the React app on like an iPad or something that's, duct taped to a stand in the store. It's that simple, right? You can see that we pull in the components that we want from the library, and then we can go in and use them or extend them as we want. This is all JavaScript stuff. And if you don't know JavaScript or don't care, it doesn't really matter. This is a very, very basic, very simple example of how that could work. But this is nothing new. This is how components library and JavaScript work. So you show this to an average JavaScript developer, and they're going to be like, yeah, come on. Go back to the slide with the 3 things. This is all the same. So how do we make this work with Drupal? And how do we make that easy? I talked briefly about the PDB module. That's the approach that I highly recommend. Although hopefully we'll have another fork of it called Component in the next quarter or so. Basically the way that this works, and it is so incredibly elegant and genius, it's one of my favorite little things. Everybody knows that when you have your Drupal application and you add a module into it, you don't have to tell Drupal that module is there. You got to turn it on or off. You got to configure it. But you don't tell Drupal, I just added this module, and here's where it's located. The reason you don't have to do that is because Drupal has an auto-discovery mechanism. When it bootstraps and you go to the modules page, it has looked through the entire code base. It has looked for info.yaml files. It's pulled those in, it's made a directory of those, and inside that info.yaml file, there's a thing, it just says type. Type module, type theme. And that's how Drupal discovers what's available. So what the people, Matt Davis and the people that did the PDB module did is they said, okay, let's do the same thing, only let's extend it. So now Drupal will know to look for themes, it'll know to look for modules, and it'll know to look for type PDB. In the fork that we've been working on, I want to change it so it's type component. I think that makes a lot more sense. And so now all of a sudden, if there's an info.yaml file, type component, Drupal sees that it's there, it knows that there's a component there. That info.yaml file tells Drupal where the JavaScript files are located. It tells it what kind of JavaScript it is. Is this React? Is it Angular? Is it Vue? And therefore, which kind of submodule of PDB needs to load it. Where the CSS is located. If there's any optional configuration to expose to the end user, you can put that in there too. Some other functions and features, which is pretty cool. And Drupal will take care and load all that up. As soon as it sees it, and that particular module, or that exposes it has been enabled, then it creates a block, an instance of a block in the CMS that houses this component. So from a site builder perspective, from a content creator's perspective, I have another block. It's just this block happens to be a product configurator versus a blog post or a media item. For me as a content creator, as a site builder, I don't have to know what's going on. I don't care what's going on. I just know that this is a piece I've got and this is a thing I want. And oh cool, product configurator, great. Make a new page, drop that onto the page because it's just a block, nothing new. And then it loads up, it does everything because it's just running React on the client side, and everybody's happy. It's fantastic, super, super simple. Now that is already pretty awesome. Like from a Drupal perspective, I don't have to go through and create my own a custom block plugin for every single component and wire in the JavaScript libraries and do twig files and do all this. You can do that if you want to, but I don't have to. And developers are lazy, so let's be lazy. But this is where it gets really interesting because for the JavaScript developer, for the front-end developer, they can now make their components available to Drupal users without having to know PHP, without having to know anything about Twig. They don't have to know anything about Drupal, which is great because they hate Drupal. Not everybody, but you run into that. A lot of JavaScript developers don't really care for CMSs and they don't want to mess with it. That's totally fine. Now they don't have to. Okay? And as we're going to see here, we can have them create this and make it available for everybody to use. Super, super powerful. So on this branch, right, because we had the first slide that had the library and that had Drupal and React, and on the Drupal side, it's actually no different. We're still using a package manager, and you can use Composer or you could even use NPM, that's fine too, to pull that component library into the code base, just like we do with everything else, and now we're good to go. And this is about what it looks like. Excuse me. So you'll notice in my product builder component, I have an info.yaml file. That would have probably been created by the JavaScript developer. It's okay, YAML doesn't scare them. And you can see here I've got the name of it, the type, description, all of that's bubbled up into Drupal to be available. I see it's React, I see my CSS, which is going to go in the header, my JavaScript, which is going to go in the footer. Very simple example, but it works pretty well. Nice and easy. And depending on which submodule of PDB that you use, or if you wanted to extend or make your own, you could actually make it even simpler than that if you wanted to. Because again, we can extend these things and build on it. So very, very simple. So, in order to add this component library into Drupal, or at least the blocks from it, I need to have an info.yaml file for any of the components that I want to be available in the CMS. So I can pull in the whole component library, and maybe there's 30 or 40 components in there, but I only want 5 of them available to Drupal. Great, I just need 5 info.yaml files. Those other ones that are for the application that I don't need, because I'm going to manage the menu myself, thank you very much, I don't even have to expose those to Drupal if I don't want to. It's a little bit extra code sitting there, but the efficiencies of having that shared library Totally worth it. And then at that point, you're done. Like from the Drupal side, you don't have to do anything except just pull that in, however you choose to do it. Super, super easy. Very, very handy.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Those info YAML files, can they live anywhere in the file structure? Do they have to live inside a themes directory or inside a modules directory to get loaded, or can it be discovered anywhere in the file structure?
So it can be discovered anywhere that Drupal's going to see. Typically, that's going to be in a doc root. However, you need to remember that in that info.yaml, it is going to be referencing, like, maybe the CSS or maybe the JavaScript or whatever. So you want it to live with a component, ideally. What I personally like to do is I like to pull it in and then just make a symlink into a module.
Okay.
And then the module itself is basically just a dummy that I can turn on to make that component library available. And then inside of that module, there's that symlink components folder, which then references wherever I've pulled that library in.
Okay.
So from Drupal's perspective, it sees a module, that module has a folder, that folder has a bunch of components in it. From an actual perspective, it's just an info.yaml and a symlink, and the library lives wherever it lives. So how does this work? As we talked about, these components are presented as blocks. So site builders can use them, content authors can use them, works with existing tools. And this is kind of an example I like to show people to help them understand. Everything in white is just straight Drupal, right? The menu, the logo, the view on the side, the template that's rendering the product information which may have been pulled in via Migrate API or whatever you want to do is fine. These red pieces are decoupled components. So you'll notice that those things work really, really well for things that are uncacheable. Like in the upper right, you can see that there's my account and my dashboard and welcome Ron to whatever. You can do that in Drupal, but you're going to be breaking cache. We don't want to do that. Easy to do with on the client side. Same thing with cart. So a cart, you're never going to cache in Drupal. I personally prefer, when doing like a headless e-commerce implementation, that Drupal is completely ignorant of everything transactional. And that all happens on the client side. And this is how we can do it. As well as you can see, like the rating for the product, a lot of times those are driven by third-party plugins. So that could easily be completely offloaded. And then things like we talked about earlier, availability, pricing. Like if I'm going to load up this product information and show it to somebody, but I can't show them something, like it's a business requirement, I can't show them that I can't allow them to buy a product that is out of stock, pretty common business requirement. If Drupal's got to make a live call to check and then regenerate the page, if based on how many items are in stock, you can't cache that. You're going to have scaling issues. But if all that happens is when you load the page, it then makes the call and only changes that one little piece, that's something that we can do pretty easily. And again, because that's a common use case, in other applications, you're going to need that functionality too. You may as well standardize on it. The blue stuff is personalization. Obviously, Acquia has a personalization product called Lift. That's why it says Acquia Lift down there. That's what we would recommend. But whatever your personalization or your A/B testing or any other type of tool is going to be, those things can live side by side. And they're all happy to work together. So when do you use each one? Real good question. So again, we kind of talked about this earlier. These are some of the benefits that Drupal provides for us out of the box. So what we want to think about is all of these things and all the other things that I haven't listed here that we want to take advantage of, and we want to make sure that we're not having to reinvent the wheel because we're throwing something out. So when we talk about using a traditional CMS or a hybrid CMS, very often it really comes down to whether or not you have non-technical content creators that need some type of interface. They need some type of UI and tools to let them build the content they want to build. Not always, because you could do headless CMS, but a lot of times, especially now, people are spoiled. They're used to being able to have some control over the visual output. And now we've got things like Layout Builder, which lets us do that even better. So a lot of times they're going to be expecting that. When those authors need preview capability, it is possible with a headless CMS to provide preview capability of the content you're either working on or creating inside of your decoupled application. It is not necessarily an easy thing to do, and it is not an out-of-the-box thing to do. Why reinvent the wheel? Drupal lets you create content. It lets you preview that content. It lets you preview that content across multiple device types and screen sizes and breakpoints. And if you want to embed your decoupled components in there, it'll let you do that too. So really, really handy. So pretty much anytime you were going to have to recreate what Drupal provides, that's when hybrid makes sense. And I say traditional or hybrid, but basically, especially if you consider Ajax as being hybrid, then it's all hybrid, but I digress. Fully decoupled, we did talk about this, but in a nutshell, this is pretty much it. When you go fully decoupled, the developer has all the power. And so, of course, a lot of times that's what developers want. I'm a developer. I want all the power. I want to control everything and do things the way I want to do them. But that removes the power from the site builder and the author, which means, as we talked about before, a developer can often become the bottleneck. So as much as I love having power and having the control and doing things the way I want, what I really don't like as a developer is I don't like maintaining things, because creation is far more fun, and I really don't like doing customer support. No offense to any of the users that I ever have had to support or ever will support, nothing but love for the team. I still don't want to be doing that. I would rather they do and make the changes that they're able to make, and I just support them in doing that in a sane way. So fully decoupled makes a lot of sense when you have a tightly controlled user experience. A kiosk is a perfect example. No one is going to go in and want to create different layouts in the kiosk. That doesn't make any sense. It needs to work the way it works. It needs to fit within the form factor. It's not going to be changing. It has a specific purpose. It has a specific thing it needs to do. So it's got specific functionality. Content creators might be creating content, but they don't need to control the display of the kiosk. That's not something that they need to do. Probably not something they should do, right? And also in any situation where the developer is not likely to become the bottleneck. So again, we want to try and keep the team working smoothly. So how does this look if we pull this all together? So going back to our original example, we have this shared component library. Now, for developers, if you are the JavaScript developer who is creating, managing, and maintaining that component library, you do your work there. Everything's good, everything's happy. The only extra thing is any of those components that you want to be available in the CMS, you have to add that info.yaml. That's the only extra thing you need to do. Really easy to do, doesn't have to be for everything, just the ones you want to expose. Then you've got your CMS, you've got your JavaScript application for the kiosk, some other application, could be an internal tool, possibly mobile app, whatever. All of those different things are consuming and using that component library. Now you've got consistency across all of your applications. They're going to look very similar, if not exactly the same. They're going to work exactly the same. You're not going to be redoing the same work over and over again. You're going to be taking one thing and using it multiple places. Much more efficient. For content creators, they get to manage content in a single place. So they go to Drupal, they go to their site, they're creating and managing their content, they can do their personalization as they want to, but because we're hybrid, you can optionally feed out that content as well. So that kiosk application we made, it's got the product configurator, but maybe for those products, when you're digging into those features and you want to know what's about them, you might want to pull out the information that the marketing team put on about all the whiz-bang features and sell the sizzle, not the steak, and all the wonderful things they did to get you really excited to buy this, this new MacBook Pro. Developers not going to put that in there. So they can just simply call for that from the API. And as the marketing team either creates or updates or manages that content, they don't have to put it in the app. The app's just going to pull it in automatically. So again, create once, publish everywhere. So we've got this idea of a have a shared component library, and now we have this idea of this shared content source or content API. Now we've got a really, really powerful, complex system that's actually not that complex. It's actually fairly simple, but really powerful. So some resources to take a look at. The PDB module, as I've noted a few times, there's some refactoring going on. So that'll be coming down the pipe, hopefully pretty soon. There's a sub-module currently for PDB. It's called React Block. We use that in the demo. There's also PDB_view, and there's a couple others floating around out there. You can also create your own. But go take a look at it, because it could be really helpful for you. Has anyone here heard of the Acquia Commerce Framework? So Acquia Commerce Framework is not a product. It's not a module. It's just an example of how you can do headless commerce using what Drupal provides. Migrate API or something like it to pull in data, PDB or something like it for the transactional non-cacheable pieces. There is a repo on GitHub, Acquia/ACF, Acquia Commerce Framework, that has the example. It's got a demo in there that you can spin up and run and play with. It's a good thing to look at. It's a really great case study and a really good example. There's also a video there that talks about it, which is pretty cool, and that demo that it's got as well. Fantastic. Here is, if you wanted these slides for some reason, you can go and grab them. Might be helpful if you were talking to somebody, either a JavaScript developer or a customer, a potential customer, and wanted to talk through some of these things. Feel free to grab these. I didn't put it on there, but there are actually a number of really cool webinars that Acquia's done that cover this topic, freely searchable. I think there's one called Demystifying Decoupled, and another was with Matt Davis, who created PDB, out there as well. But questions? Comments? Does it make sense? Yeah, pretty much. So let me ask you guys this. If right now, when you walk out the door and you ran into somebody and they were asking you about Decoupled, do you feel like you could at least describe at a high level this hybrid mode of using Drupal and why that's valuable? Yes. Most people? Yeah? Fantastic. Okay. Please do reach out if you have questions, if you have suggestions. If you want to get involved or help with some of this stuff in the community space, let me know. Yes, sir?
I would like to help with the new PDB module.
Sweet.
So after this, I can show you kind of what I have currently set up.
Perfect. Love it. Thank you. I'll meet with you after. Yeah. Otherwise, if there's no more questions, then thank you guys very much. Appreciate it.